What up, Wizards? It's Dev from The Place, and did you know Standard is a mess? A funny statement because it tells you nothing about the time and place in which I'm recording this video. I could have said that any time in the last 6 years. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but even though they banned a bunch of cards, and a rotation happened, and a couple of sets came out, that didn't stop one deck from continuing to rule Standard. Tale as old as time nowadays in Magic the Gathering, but that's no excuse for not trying. Don't get me wrong here, I think the onus is mostly on Wizards to stop printing cards that are really obviously broken to anybody that reads them for the first time, but we as the player base also have a responsibility to try out, play with, experiment with new stuff, and old stuff for that matter, to make sure that nothing's passing us by. I have the deep-seated anxiety of wondering whether every single Standard season that goes by contains dozens of cards that we as a player base just never give enough of a chance. How many cards have come and gone in Standard, got printed and then rotated out a couple of years later, and never truly got the shot they deserved? They were waiting the entire time to be the best deck in Standard, and we just never unearthed it. I worry about this constantly, and there's nothing we can do about the cards that have already passed us by, but the cards that are still in Standard and aren't getting enough attention, those we can try and save. And despite the Standard we admittedly find ourselves in right now, I still have to believe, because it's important to have faith in this life, that there are cards like this out there right now. Colossi in Standard just beneath the sands, waiting for an archaeologist like you to dust off that first layer. So today, let's look at 10 Standard sleepers.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back, ready to go ahead and get into it, blasting off with an old friend of mine at number 10, Quintorius Cons. Old Quincy over here, don't say he can't, because he canned. An elephant never forgets, and I will never forget about this man. I love a good 5-mana Planeswalker, and we haven't really had too many of those lately, to be honest with you, except for Elspeth Stormslayer. But that just goes to show that a 5-mana Planeswalker can see play in this Standard right now. And this guy can make some tokens for you as well. He can even discover, which is kind of nice. He's got like a nice ultimate that you'll never use. But the important thing about this dude is the passive ability, which is better now than it's ever been in Standard. Now, first of all, this works with Discover, so I guess like synergy with self points there, but also works with any impulse drawing that you're doing in red decks and stuff. It works with adventures, and they just keep printing those into Standard. I feel like there are kind of a lot of adventures in Standard right now, but apart from that, it works with plot. If you remember that mechanic from a few sets ago, there were some plot cards that see play. And apart from that, it works with Warp, which just came out in Edge of Eternities as I'm recording this. I don't know when you're watching it, but that was the last set that came out, and Warp is a pretty cool little ability that works really nicely with Quintorius. One of my favorite little pieces of potential synergy in this format is a Boros deck that plays Quintorius and Esteli Reclaimer. You know, if you've already got Quintorius on the table, when you play your Esteli Reclaimer out of Warp, then you get a passive trigger, you get something out of your graveyard, seems cool. But if Quintorius is in your yard, when you pay 5 mana for your Esteli Reclaimer, now you can get your Quintorius back. That is 10 total mana value, one of which is a Planeswalker and the other of which is a 5/4 flyer, so that seems pretty threatening to me. I like the idea of like a Boros mid-range deck with Quintorius on the top end. It could do some stuff. But we'll move on to the next one here, and I'm going to apologize in advance for putting Vivi Ornithir back on the screen. I know you're sick of looking at it by now, so am I, but I need it on screen to make a really dumb point, or at least most of you are probably going to think it's dumb, but bear with me here. What exactly is Vivi? This is a 3-mana red legend that can put mana into your pool once per turn. Well, my number 9 is Rowan, Scion of War, a 3-mana red legend that can put mana into your pool once per turn. You see, wasn't it dumb? Yeah, Vivi grows and makes mana all at the same time, does damage to your opponents, and all that it asks is that you cast spells, which you want to do anyway. You're playing Magic the Gathering, that's the whole point. So yeah, it's easier to do Vivi stuff, don't get me wrong, but Rowan, just throw this at you, exists in a format where Cecil Dark Knight is a playable and played card, and so is Bob Dark Confidant is a playable and played card, and these are both like really strong cards that deplete your life total, so I think that could be at least okay with Rowan making, you know, a couple of mana every turn if Cecil got to attack. And, you know, if you're taking 3 to a Bob, I guess that's, you know, taps for 3 mana. That seems pretty good on Rowan's end. You're losing life the entire time, but so it's for mana. You're willing to make that trade. I guess there's also like starting town if you wanted more ways to knock off your own life total, but there's plenty of ways actually in this Standard right now. There's a mono black deck that kind of revolves around specifically that concept. So if you just splash some mountains and some starting towns and such, throw in Rowans, and now you got all the mana in the world, which is something that like most decks want. So I don't know, man. I haven't tried it yet, but maybe one of us should. But let's move on to number 8 here. This is Niko, Light of Hope, a card that I imagine a lot of people just like completely forgot existed. When it comes into play, you get a couple of shards, and then for a couple of mana, you can turn your shards into one of your guys, and that guy goes away for a turn. You exile him and he comes back EOT. So there's a couple of ways to use this that are really clever, at least to my mind. I came up with them. I'm very clever, but first of all, I guess I have to bring up Warp again here. Usually Warp allows you to cast a creature for way less than it should cost to cast that creature. So if you warp something in and then target it with Niko's ability, then sure, you'll exile it for a second, but your shards will become copies of it. That could lead to a bunch of fun plays. And then EOT, you'll get an enter the battlefield trigger from your warp guy again, or you'll at least get your warp guy back, and you don't have to pay full price for him. He never goes into like warp exile where you have to cast him later or anything. He just comes back to the table and is like, oh, I guess I'm here now. So that's a fun little trick with Niko, but so are overlords, basically any overlord that you can name, but all of these have both enters and attacks triggers. That means when you blink the overlord, you'll get its enters trigger when it comes back into play at end of turn, but you'll also get its attacks triggers off of the shards going in. So like Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, how much damage are you doing? 1 million? It's crazy. Like what you could do with just that combo. But I guess there's also fear of missing out in the same deck. If you got enough different stuff in your graveyard, then suddenly you can get like 2 or 3 different FOMOs attacking in the same turn and getting extra attack steps with a different guy, and that could be a whole lot of fun too. There's a lot of cool stuff you could do with Niko right now, I'm telling you, but there's plenty beyond just that. You could also do like, this is a really dumb one and it might get cut out of the video, but I really like the idea of it, so whatever. Summon Leviathan. This will probably never happen in a million years, but it's definitely like the streamer brain in me kind of working. It's like, what you want to do is have a Summon Leviathan on the table that's already gone off. You got a Niko on the table and your couple of shards, right? Well, you can blink your Summon Leviathan, turn the 2 shards into 6/6s that draw cards when they attack, and, you know, swing for 12, that seems good. And then EOT, the Summon Leviathan comes back from Blinktown, and you bounce all the guys again. It seems pretty decent to me. Costs 1 million mana and is very janky, but it's just one example of a powerful thing that Niko can do, and I've already given you a couple of other ones. I think the Overlord example is probably way better than the Summon Leviathan example, but still, there are things Niko can do, and I think we ought to get to doing them. He's a good card. Well, let's keep going and look at number 7 here, which is Sab-sunen Luxa Embodied. I'm not sure if I remember that job title correctly. I guess we'll know once we get in the editing booth. I guess Hips Embodied is what it should be called. You guys see them hips? But anyway, this is a card that I think people have just completely forgotten about, mostly because they've forgotten about Ether Drift as a whole. And I say this as a guy that actually unironically loves Ether Drift. I got a whole video on the channel defending it that nobody watched, but anyway, even I can see why you forgot about that set. There's only a few memorable cards in it, but this passed my radar the other day when I saw it in an MTGO League deck. It was like Soul Tide Control that played a bunch of cool stuff that you don't see enough of, but Sab-sunen is kind of the one that jumped out at me the most. It's like, oh yeah, you exist and you're probably really good. She just sits there and draws cards like all game long, and she's basically unkillable by most played methods in Standard right now. Like, sure, there are cards in Standard that kill it, but it ain't a whole lot, and it ain't a whole lot that are in decks right now especially, so very cool for that reason. It's just going to draw you a couple of cards every other turn, and sometimes it'll attack for a boatload, and there are other ways of manipulating the amount of counters that go on it every turn. So it'll draw you cards if that's what you need, it'll attack if that's what you need. Just a nice little kind of control finisher that does everything control wants. Draws the cards, swings for a lot, and is more or less just almost impossible to actually remove. And don't forget those hips. Number 6 is Season of Loss here. Now this is another like 5 mana card, I promise. The entire list isn't 5 mana cards, but unlike the last 5 mana card we looked at, this doesn't have to just sit on the table for like a billion turns until it's turn 11, and I'm just assuming you'll get there, whatever. This isn't doing that. This is just winning the game the moment you resolve it, and I do think it does that a lot of the time. There is a very cool deck that's been going around in the brewer circles in Standard recently that plays not just this, but also Ice Till Explorer, because the cards go really well together, man. If Ice Till's out, you're playing lands, you're milling cards. You're playing lands from your yard, you're milling more cards. So that's putting a ton of creature cards into your yard, but so can things like Town Greeter, which mills 4, Explore when it comes into play. There's a lot of ways to mill yourself in Standard right now. And in that deck, by the way, there was a card that almost made this list too. The Myco Tyrant is like a 2-of in this proposed deck list that's going around. And the Myco Tyrant gives you a ton of little sapperlings every turn if you're descending enough. And with Ice Till Explorer, you obviously are. So that's a nice combo too. But Season of Loss is the card that I think has much more play than a card like the Myco Tyrant in current Standard. You know, we've got Overlord of the Bale Merc, the Black Overlord, to put, creatures into our yard. We've got a lot of ways of putting creatures into our yard right now. And it's not just for the Insidious Roots decks, but for what it's worth, this could go in the Insidious Roots decks too. Just anything that plays a ton of creatures that it wants to mill into its yard, and there are actually still a few potential decks like that out there. Could just use this as a one-shot, kill them right now thing, because it is actually not necessarily likely, but at least possible that you have 20 dudes in your yard, but you probably won't have to. Most of the time, you'll probably just have to shoot for 8 or 10 and finish the game with a Season of Loss, and I think it's entirely possible. But in the meantime, if you need a panic button, this can kind of be a sweeper for you instead. That's a nice mode. Draw you a bunch of cards if you wanted to. A lot of cool stuff about this card, and I don't think 5 mana is too much to ask. It's also an Aristocrats deck in Standard right now, too. Just saying, that seems like they would go okay in that. But number 5, halfway down the list here, we're going to start getting into the serious stuff that I think is actually good now and not just speculation from my dumb jank brain. Number 5 is Frenzied Baloth. Now, to be honest, the best deck that plays forests, I think right now, is the mono green landfall deck, but it's been kind of MIA on MTGO leagues and challenge results and stuff for over a week now. That deck is not entirely gone at this point, but I just haven't seen too much of it lately. That said, that I think that deck could play Frenzied Baloth, at least in the sideboard, but what I really think that Baloth belongs in is a more dedicated mono green stompy deck, and I don't think that deck is too bad right now. Like, instead of having to play a 1-mana 0/1 on turn 1 like Saz's Chocobo, or a 2-mana 1/2 on turn 2 like Tifa, and just kind of hope that you get the exact right amount of fetch lands to make this thing work, baby, and hope my opponent doesn't have removal. You could just actually play creatures that are good, like above rate, like from the moment that you play them. In the 1-drop slot, you got like Paw Patch Recruit and a bunch of other options, but Paw Patch is kind of amazing, so I wanted to point it out specifically. You've got Flourishing Bloomkin in the 2-drop slot, but even if you play it on like turn 3 or 4, it's always on rate so long as you're playing forest. I actually think that Bloomkin is a kind of incredible creature we don't talk about enough too. So there's a lot of good options. You got the new Surik at 3 mana if you wanted, but you've also got huge dudes like Pugnacious Hammerskull. Like, mono green has some real options right now, not to mention all the other like protection spells the Tifa deck already plays, like Snakeskin Veil. We've got access to those too. So I think that there could be an argument for mono green stompy, and a lot of it is because of cards like this, incredibly above rate, more so than we've like really ever seen in terms of like pure power in the 2-drop slot. Sure, there have been better 2-drops. I'm not saying that, but geez, look at the rate for everything you're getting for this crazy. So Frenzied Baloth probably should be seeing some play at some point here. My number 4 is an example of me learning from my comments section, because you guys all told me to go out and try Mono White Life Gain the other day, and I did it. And wow, actually, I'm going to kind of represent this deck with Aerith Gainsborough here, but I kind of just mean Mono White Life Gain in general. Your Essence Channelers, your Johnny's Pride Mates even. It just turns out these creatures are pretty decent right now. But you could also make it Orzhov and go like Amalia if you wanted to. There's a lot of great stuff in Orzhov for Life Gain, still Starscape Cleric, blah, blah, blah. But one way or the other, I think no matter how you build a Life Gain deck, it's actually pretty decent right now. One of the better decks against Vivi is Mono Red, and we are really good against Mono Red, but we're also kind of decent against Vivi compared to a lot of other decks, in Standard at least. I know it doesn't seem like a great matchup, but, the Vivi deck is going to do some burst damage to you, it's going to do some overtime damage to you, and we're actually pretty good at keeping up with the amount of damage that they're dealing with to us with our life gain. Apart from that, they just don't have all the removal in the world, They got some Into the Flood Maws, they got some Torch the Towers, but they're mostly worried about their plan, and they don't play a ton of removal, so they can only blast through so many Aeriths and Essence Channelers and stuff like that before we actually land one. Not to mention our other important creatures, sometimes Linden, more often like Hinterland Sanctifier. There's a lot of really important creatures in this deck, and you'd be surprised how quickly this thing can snowball. Sure, it still peters out to certain decks in the format. You probably don't want to play against Azorius Control with Mono White Life Game, but 1 or 2 bad bad matches does not a bad deck make. And I think this one has some game against some of the better decks in Standard right now. So if you haven't tried it yet, give it a shot. Top 3 now, though, to look at a card that is kind of busted through in Commander and occasionally even in another format or two, but it's never really made noise in Standard. It's Artist Talent. Now, some of these classes do very well for themselves, like Storm Chaser's Talent, others not so much. Gossip's Talent. A card that I still want to be good, and I just can't make it good. But Artist Talent is actually a good card, and I guess a lot of us have made this good at one point or another. I've had other people report in the comments section that they have fun Artist Talents builds in Standard, and there's a lot of ways to build around it. You could build the obvious thing, a sort of Boros burn deck where you can, churn through spells and discard your lands and get actual burn spells and stuff. On Chapter 2, or Level 2, whatever it is, you could always reduce the cost of your lightning strikes and whatnot. And that last bit there, you could just make your spells do way more damage. So it does go super well in burn, but it goes surprisingly well in a couple of other decks. For one, if you can find room for it in a kind of discard matters deck, then it's not too bad. Like Monument to Endurance is pretty good with an Artist Talent, but so are things like Marauding Mako that want you to discard a bunch of cards. All you have to do is cast spells, and then suddenly your Mako is getting larger. It also works with Proph's Eidetic Memory, which is a pretty hot card right now. I'm just not sure that the decks that play all the cards I just mentioned, at least Mako and Prophs, can really fit in copies of Artist Talent, but that said, it's a non-creature spell. Those decks want to play that. It triggers off of non-creature spells, so deck wants that. Deck wants to churn through cards and find the answers. I think it could be good in Vivi if you find room for a Silver Bullet or something like that, but I think that it's good in decks all by itself without needing extremely broken cards. In some ways, I think it is an extremely broken card, but you don't really have to do much beyond the first mode on it to get a good amount of value out of it. Whether you're trying to discard stuff for reanimation or later flashing back, again, there's just a lot of lines you could take with an Artist Talent. I think it is a solid Magic card for sure. Now for number 2, we'll go back to Ixalan to take a look at Hulking Raptor here. Maybe my favorite dinosaur in Standard, but sometimes I feel like I'm the only one playing this dude. Now that's probably because a lot of people enjoy land ramp, especially in this format right now where you've got Ice Till Explorer that procs off of playing lands, you got your Tifas and your Mossborns and your other landfall stuff that triggers off playing lands. And even if you're in a dedicated ramp deck that's trying to get to a 7 or 8 drop or something, again, often land ramp is the order of the day, but I think that Hulking Raptor, while not entirely removal proof, is still a pretty reliable little guy. He also triggers your Outcaster Trailblazer, just saying, so you draw a card when he comes into play, and the Outcaster Trailblazer is making mana for you when it comes into play or whatever, so a lot of ways to make mana in green right now, which is nothing new, but these are particularly good ways of making mana in green. I firmly believe that Hulking Raptor, although it might not, always make it around to your next turn, at the very least soaked up a removal spell and probably also soaked up your opponent's entire turn, which is something that you want 100% of the time. And if you do get the mana off of it, not only have you ramped to possibly 7 by turn 4 or 5, but you've also got a 5-power guy out, which I think is one of the best things about this card. It can't always get attacking, but it'll almost always trade in combat, which is fine to do, especially after it's already, helped you cast a couple of cards. But, you could ramp all the way to Ugin on the next turn by dropping a Hulking Raptor. And again, if it eats a removal spell, it eats a removal spell and probably time walks your opponent for their trouble, which is always fine. But again, when it does make the mana, it's actually one of the better ways of ramping in all of Standard, and I will stand by that. But we are at my number 1, by definition, the card that I think is best in this entire video. The one card that I don't think is seeing basically any real play right now, outside of a couple of arena schmoes, but apart from that, I really just don't see Riverchurn Monument ever, and it's very good. And I say it this way with the inflection in my voice like a question because I don't understand why nobody else sees it. It's just obviously a game-winning card, especially in conjunction with a couple of things we already have in Standard. Like, first of all, it just one-shot combos them with Jadur, the land from Final Fantasy that produces blue mana, or has an adventure that kills them with this card. But I guess there's also Singularity Rupture, which also kills them alongside this card. These are just 2-card combos that kill the opponent. That seems okay, but there's also Space-Time Anomaly in blue-white, which goes well with this too. I mean, it doesn't necessarily always one-shot them, but it will 9.5 times out of 10, I find. So Monument is busted right now. And like, honestly, I like the other mill cards I've been talking about up to now, but Monument is almost always the thing that actually closes the game out. Mill is strong, and if you want to play a strong deck right now that not a whole lot of people are prepared for, I think Mill is actually the answer, the truth. So that's all I really got to say. I know you hate this number one. A lot of you will absolutely despise this, but it just is what it is. And that's basically it. Apart from, I guess, a couple of honorable mentions, I wanted to bring up Keycard somewhere in this video. I like the idea of casting non-creatures and making a 1/1 flyer every time I do that. That actually seems really powerful, and I want to build a commander deck around it, but also standard. In the 4-drop slot, there's Bruised Tarl as well, and I've written every now and again somebody gets in my ear in the comments about Bruised Tarl. This actually is a pretty good card. I know it doesn't look like much. It looks kind of like a joke, a gag card, you know, but once you actually get it on the table, it's like, oh, this just made 6 power for me when it entered the battlefield, and if I can blink it, it'll make more. And as a matter of fact, it kind of made 8 power because the Ox has double strike. It's just kind of wild how good this card can actually be, so give Bruce a chance if you haven't done it. But now it's your turn. Let me know what cards you are having success with in Standard, or at least what you're brewing with and enjoying. And do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Hit the thumb button. You don't have to subscribe because you're above scribe, but still do hit subscribe. I don't know where I was going with that one. I have a Patreon. So the whole reason I'm doing this video is because the patrons voted for it. So if you want to be a part of that process and affect the course of YouTube history itself, all it costs is $1 a month. I'm pretty sure I'm worth it. I work really hard. So hit the link in the description or just paste it into your address bar is more likely what you're going to have to do. And yeah, help me out over there. But if you don't do that, I'm not too worried about it. I just really like that you're here. Thanks for being here. Appreciate that. But that is Allski Kowalski. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.